Let's talk about Mauga. Brand new hero from Overwatch 2 has received a lot of discussion about whether he's OP, whether he's underpowered, easy to counter, or too hard to counter. We're going to talk about a lot of that. Now, keep in mind that a lot of this is initial impressions. Spent a lot of time with him in quick play, spent a lot of time analyzing his kit from just a coach's perspective, and most importantly, I actually spent a lot of time this past Tuesday spending some time playing him in pugs. What we did is we played a lot of Mauga mirrors, and then we spent the last 7, 8, 9, 10 games playing up against non-mirrors. So I was playing Mauga, somebody was playing Doomfist, I was playing Zarya, somebody was playing Mauga, and we tried to ban almost every single tank just to see how he felt in a lot of these different circumstances, a lot of different maps. And we came away with a lot of different, at least initial conclusions. My initial thought process with Mauga is there's going to be some nuance with how he's played. Any character that has the ability to move around the map is going to be able to find ways of outplaying things, but there are a lot really of initial concerns. So let's talk over a couple of these initial concerns. I'm actually going to pull up the practice range while we're talking about it. The initial concern with Mauga, and this goes back to his release, I guess not even alpha, but like beta really, when he was released for that one weekend, is he's got a huge hitbox, he's easy to spam, he's easy to crowd control, situational survivability. In other words, his damage mitigation is really, really, really bad unless he's healing. And usually it takes being up close to somebody to at least heal consistently. And then piggybacking off of that, he's essentially unkillable in point-blank range with the amount of sustain that he can get. His ability with his E is a little bit unengaging, not as fun to use, at least it was. And then also demands babysitting a lot of time in terms of the supports, DPS to be playing around him almost 24/7. And the question is did they actually fix or improve any of these issues? And I want to pull up the patch notes here really quick. So let's talk about these. Now, I've already gone over a couple of these, the patch notes overall. You can check that in a previous video, but I'm going to talk about the Mauga specific one. So let's talk about the base health increased through armor. So there's less health, more armor. This was definitely a good change and something that he needed because it gave him less, more general survivability and less specific heal survivability. The sad thing that I've come to realize is that pretty much every tank in Overwatch 2 needs some form of damage mitigation, either through shield, matrix, bubble, armor, or certainly some form of mobility or something along those lines. This was a good change. You definitely feel it in the rework here. Head hit volume reduced 15%. It's hard to really put a number on this one, but I'm sure that this was a good change. This definitely has the spirit of the law in terms of that change, and I'm sure it is helping. Again, he was so easy to shoot. And so easy to crowd control, so easy to damage. I feel like these 3 changes were really, really big and definitely needed to happen. Spread for firing both guns reduced 15%. So this just basically means that it allows you to get that sustain kicking in a little bit faster. The problem with this is that it means that it's a little bit more myopic with how you're using your weapons. I guess we could add that as another complaint about Mauga, is that alternating the weapons doesn't always feel as rewarding as it ought to, especially if you're not good mechanically. Now, I would not call myself good mechanically. I'd call myself competent, master's level mechanics around. But for the vast majority of the player base, it's not going to be very reasonable or realistic for them to be motivated to need to alternate weapons. Set somebody on fire with your left click, finish with the crits and the heal on the right click. And that just doesn't seem like that's something that works super well for the average player base. Fire rate multiplier reduced, whatever here. Damage per shot increased, again, just raw damage, sure. Damage fall off range increased from 25 to 30 meters. This is probably a good change, definitely a little bit easier to do reasonable damage at range, which I think is a great change. I think Hawk made a tweet about that, I agree with. Max ammo increased, I guess. In some ways, I would have almost preferred the max ammo to be reduced and the reload time to be reduced, so that it actually feels like there's less of just a massive clip, and then you're spending this long time reloading at the most awkward time. Movement speed penalty reduced. This is a really big one too, which means that when you're firing your weapons, you're not as easy to hit. So this is an indirect survivability buff, which I actually think is a good one. Could no longer be entered by hack, obviously a good change here. Damage reduction during overrun increased as well, and I think this is a good change as well. Like, we need to be motivated to use this ability. We need to be motivated to use this ability. Like, it's really important that you're rewarded for using this ability, because I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely the most fun, most interactive aspect of this kit, and it felt like I wasn't allowed to use it as much as I would have even liked to. Cardiac overdrive, lifesteal increased from 60 to 70%. This one is more about like allowing your team to lifesteal. So this one demands a little bit of more attention. Berserker passive overhealth conversion rate, crit rate increased from 40 to 50%. So a lot of things that definitely helped him, but a lot of just flat out buffs. And the key thing here to note is that they really didn't address the things that felt bad playing into Mauga. See, one of the problems with Mauga is that, as we said, is that he literally obliterates tanks in a 1v1. Now, 1v1s isn't everything. A 1v1 isn't everything. Overwatch 2 doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're not standing there shooting the enemy tank the entire time. usually, but that does happen quite frequently, and having that aspect of his kit being just completely bloated out of proportion is unbelievable. I actually went with a buddy of mine and we 1v1 just to see how it would go versus every single tank, and Mauga obliterated everybody, and I was not even good at this character. Orisa critting through Fortify, you go right through Ramatra's block, same thing with Doomfist. Diva gets destroyed, Junker Queen gets destroyed, Winston gets annihilated. You want to laugh here. The only good thing about Winston is that you can't crit his bubble. We'll talk about that actually in a little bit here. You can crit right through Wrecking Ball's ball form. Zarya was the only one that felt okay-ish because you could cleanse the burn, and then you got a lot of charge, and then you were actually trading back with Mauga. So Zarya was probably the most competitive brawl tank, and Ryan was such a weird one. So Ryan was well, you know, we'll get to the, you know what, I'm not going to get to that just yet. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but like TLDR is that basically Mauga annihilates everybody in the tank trade. The only thing that's going to destroy him is a tank that has a way of mitigating his healing. We'll talk about that in a little bit, plus backline crowd control. So it's always a +1. Now, that's normal. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that in many instances, Mauga's going to feel really, really awful to play versus, and then also awful to play. So they seem to have made like basically marginal efforts to fix some of the issues, but they also made his frustrating things even stronger. Obliterates enemy tanks. You can struggle in squishy matchups as well. The way that the weapon works right now is unless you're very good mechanically, and even sometimes then, it can be very difficult to set people on fire, which means it can be difficult to get that overheal. So obviously here it's like, hey, I'm getting my crits with my incendiary weapons, which is, I'm getting healing here, but if you're not getting those crits, and you're not actually like building the healing, the overhealth off of setting them on fire, it can be really difficult, and I find that like, this is something that's going to be a skill check for a lot of players, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because having a high skill tank character is, again, not necessarily a bad thing. The problem with that is this character does not strike me as a high skill tank character. I actually said this recently with my Kiriko changes. My thoughts on the Kiriko changes. I think it might be okay if Kiriko is just not an amazing pick in lower ranks. Maybe that's all right. Problem with that is that's not the impression I get from Mauga. Mauga seems like a low skill tank in many aspects until you look at his, for example, his ultimate, and even things like his weapon ultimate, the aim demands at range. So I'm getting mixed signals with this character, and it's kind of confusing me. So yeah, I think that's a little bit tricky. Mirror, okay, yeah, this is the big one. My initial impression of Mauga has softened slightly because my initial impression was so bad. It was the least fun I'd had playing any Overwatch hero release ever since 2017. Because when I go into quick play, I was playing Mauga Mirrors. And never in my life have I had less fun playing Overwatch than I was playing Mauga Mirrors. I've played Ramatra Mirrors, I've played Orisa Mirrors, I've played anything that you can name. And I was miserable. So much so that nobody even wanted to play Mauga in our pugs because everybody had played Mauga in quick play and been like, this character sucks. I don't want to play this character at all. So we actually had to assign people to play Mauga just to be nice because nobody wanted to play the brand new character. Turns out it's not quite so bad in the non-tank mirror. It's a little bit more fun for sure, but the Mauga mirror is miserable because all you do is you shoot the enemy Mauga. And in a lot of situations, if you stop shooting the enemy Mauga because the enemy Mauga does so much damage to you, if you start to go for a tank or go for a squishy, the enemy Mauga is murdering you. So you have to go, I have to heal off of the enemy Mauga. And the worst part about it is if it's the smallest of things that can screw you up. Anti-nade, Discord, a headshot by the enemy Hanzo. Maybe you popped your lifesteal thing too slow. Maybe you lost your armor and then he kept his armor. He got the first couple of shots on you. Any mistake that you make in the Mauga mirror, you just immediately have to disengage because you're going to lose the sustain versus DPS trade. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible mechanic. They really need to look at rebalancing the healing and damage. We'll talk some of my suggestions later, but it's not fun at all. When a tank trade is actively miserable, then I think that the character ought to have some peace. It's the worst thing in the game. And the last problem with Mauga is just so much of him requires babysitting because he has so many overwhelming weaknesses. He's weak to anti-nade, he's weak to Discord, he's weak to poke damage, he's weak to hack, he's weak to many, many things. He needs constant babysitting. And not just babysitting in terms of support, like support, but he also needs DPS that complement his strengths. He needs people that can either benefit from his lifesteal. He needs flankers that can distract squishies in the backline. A lot of people are lambasting Ana, and I agree that Lana is by far the biggest offender here with Sleep Dart and Nade. But in actuality, if we go down the list, there's a lot of matchups that are really awkward for him. I think Sojourn, you instantly build rail off this guy 24/7. He's not very good versus Sombra. Torbjorn, if he doesn't have a lot of healing, Torbjorn will obliterate him in the spam. Hanzo, tough. Echo, tough. Discord, tough. Even just raw BAP damage. If he doesn't have a constant pocket and or he's not actively healing off of your tank, BAP damage destroys him. Even freaking Lifeweaver does a lot of damage because his hitbox is so big. If he's not actively healing, the relatively high DPS, but relatively hard to hit DPS of Lifeweaver is actually felt pretty bad. And so you're going to see an issue here where, again, this character needs constant babysitting. And I think that that's something we needed to move away from in Overwatch 2, where it's cool to have characters that have different kits, different designs, different strengths, different weaknesses. But again, we're getting to the caricature aspect of this character, where this character really only does one thing and does that one thing really, really well. That's not good balancing, and that's just not good design. So I've been very negative. Let's talk about the good of Mauga. I think the non-mirrors are a lot more fun. So when the enemy team was on, a Winston, a Wrecking Ball, a Diva, Sigma was kind of boring. Doomfist, there was a lot more engagement. It was a lot more fun, and I felt like the reason why it was more fun is I didn't have to focus the enemy tank. If they're on Doomfist, I can definitely focus him and even line him up even during like power block, right? That feels great. But if he engages my backline, I don't actually have to go chase him. See, the problem with the Mauga mirror, as I said, is that if I looked away from the tank, I died. But if it's a Doom or a Winston or a Wrecking Ball or a Diva, they're not going to kill me immediately, so I can actually go make a play. I can go run down and slam and do all that kind of fun stuff. And I think that that's something that's really important to point out, is that in the non-mirrors, this character feels a lot more fun. I think that you could balance some of the other good things is you can balance some of the survivability away. I guess in terms of suggestions here, we'll get to those in a little bit, but I do think that there's some tweaks that you can make this character. And I think when given more opportunity, whether it's the enemy tank or the composition or whatever, when given more opportunity to use his mobility, it is pretty fun. So like when I can do this and move around the map and threaten kills and things like that, and even just shooting squishies feels like really satisfying, right? It's pretty fun. Like it's not the most fun. It's still, I would say, probably the worst experience up there with Lifeweaver, but it's still a lot more fun than my initially really, really negative opinion. So let's talk about the individual hero matchups. And then I want to talk about maybe some of my suggestions here. So I actually want to pull up the replay code here, and I want to just quickly show you guys some of the pin codes that we had here. I'm not going to give like a couple of seconds in each one, and then I'm going to go into here. So I think like Samoa, for example. Samoa's when I was playing Zarya into Mauga, and these are about approximately even. Oh, I guess I'll show you guys some of my Arista here. Boy, this felt terrible. I mean, I was getting absolutely obliterated because if he went for me, he was just critting me straight through Fortified. So you had to play so patient. Where are we at here? I'm skipping too far forward. But yeah, he's gonna crit you right through Fortify, set you on fire. You guys, you cannot play Arista there. Because Arista doesn't have the capability of avoiding him, so you just immediately miss. So like you could even see it here. Let's see if I can see it. If he focuses me here, I'm going right through. I'm burning right through on fire. I guess we'll have to look a little more in detail on this, but your experiences will line up with mine. I mean, you can even see it right there. Like I'm taking so much damage. There's not a lot that I can do. I played a little bit of Zarya later on. It was the same kind of thing. Oh, I wanted to show this one. So this is where Mauga felt really bad. So anytime they went Sigma, so I had them go Sigma. This one felt really atrocious, where we get to third point, and because I have to go through the enemy Sigma, like I can't really reach the backline consistently, so I have to tank trade a little bit here because everybody's too far away. And that felt really, really bad because the Sigma just spam me, denied me heal. I could not build sustain, so I essentially had to build HP. Don't look my track, please. I had to build HP off of his backline, but his backline's freaking tiny, right? And so I'm demanding pocket 24/7 because I can't build HP off of the Sigma shield, right? So it's also kind of interesting to note, again, tracking. It's interesting to note as well that the number of things that don't burn. So some things do burn. Shields don't burn. Even though Dynamite, technically Ash's Dynamite burns, it doesn't burn on shield, but it does burn turret, I believe, and Aviari's Pylon also burns as well, so it's kind of weird. A little bit of inconsistency with that. But yeah, anyway, this felt pretty bad because if I could not reach backline, then I basically was doing nothing, and even if I did reach backline, I was always thinking like, man, a Wrecking Ball is so much better here, or Winston is so much better here, because this character, like, he just denies and then I'm just dead, right? You can see it right there, just constant babysitting. Couple other examples here. This one was a Doomfist one. This one I won't show you, but there's a couple of Winston ones where Winston was hilarious. I played versus a Grandmaster Winston player, and if he made a mistake, he just died. But he also made my life miserable because it was actually kind of hard to peel him. It took me a little bit of time to go back and peel him off. You could definitely sit inside of your backline, but it means that your backline never really takes space, so it requires some proactivity. Wrecking Ball was the Blizzard World one. You guys can actually look at these codes here. Here. If you guys are interested, you could check. There it is, right there. Just there's the codes if you ever want to look them up on your end. This is Wrecking Ball. This is Winston, and a little bit of Doomfist as well. And then this one was, I think, like a tank that was trying to take the tank trade with me. Anyway, long story short, let's actually pull up the Overwatch heroes. I think this will be more efficient. So let's talk about the matchups here. Ana, obviously terrible, feels like awful. Ashe, actually, okay, Ashe is like one of those characters where if you're not actively healing off of her tank, she obliterates you because your head is so freaking big, like your body's so big. She's really, really easy to kill. She actually works pretty well. Like I know people are talking about like, oh, you can capitalize off of the burning of dynamite with your right click. That is true. That is something that you can absolutely play with in Ashe pretty well. Bap, I liked playing versus Bap because it felt like one of the characters that I could track easier. Because even when I did dive a backline with Baptiste, it was a lot easier to track the Bap than it was a character, a smaller hitbox support. So that was good. The bad news is that Baptiste absolutely did a lot of damage to me. So again, if I'm not healing off of tank, Bap murders me. Bash is a weird one. Bastion, you guys will find out that if it's a Mauga plus a Bastion, it's really hard because the Mauga you'll need to shoot the enemy Mauga and then the Bastion just melts you. But if it's just Bastion, Bastion just freaking dies. He's so slow. He's so fat. You don't even do any sort of have any sort of problem with his head hitbox because when he's in turret form, most people are like, oh, I can't crit him. You can crit him with Mauga because you just set him on fire and you burn him alive. So Mauga destroys Bastion in a 1v1. Brig was fine. Brig wasn't too bad. Cassie, again, like anything that was like a slightly bigger hitbox wasn't too bad. Hinder wasn't obviously irrelevant because my mobility goes right through it anyway. Diva was a little tricky at points in time because if there was follow-up, she could deny a lot of my healing. But in terms of beyond that, she didn't do enough damage to me to consistently kill me. Doomfist was hit or miss. Doomfist, if he got too close to me, if he messed up, it was actually pretty easy for me to deal with him. But it was also very easy for him to avoid me. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. Echo and really any of the flying characters didn't feel too bad. She definitely did a lot of damage to me. But because she flies, I can actually shoot her as a hit scan tank. So that one didn't feel too bad. Genji was whatever. I did like the fact that I got a couple of Nanoblade cage fights where I would suck him in. Now, obviously, I had to be very careful and needed a lot of pocket because it was hard to set a Genji on fire and sustain off of him. But if there was anybody else in there that I could heal off of, or I got a Suzu or a nade, it was really, really good. You could totally shut down a Nanoblade. Hanzo, pretty easy to win in a 1v1 if you get up close, but if he keeps any sort of distance, Storm Arrow and just normal headshots can really make your life miserable. 250 damage. That's like a lot. Like he chips your armor off with one shot, and then the next shot is like you're basically 1 HP. So that was a really, really hard thing to deal with. And especially when you have a character that has a little bit of verticality like Hanzo, very difficult. Iliare, generally pretty shrug-offable. The lack of head hit shot multiplier was kind of whatever. The pylon died immediately. She was pretty easy to deal with. Jungler Queen, tricky, but mostly not too bad. Definitely a character that I had to hustle a little bit with my mechanics. Like I couldn't get behind the game. Like if she chips off my armor and hits a big carnage to me and starts getting some big shots in my head, it was pretty scary. But unless you make a big mistake, she's not gonna beat you in a 1v1. Your healing is too much. Even though her hitbox is a little bit more slender, you pretty much annihilate her. Junkrat, fatter hitbox. The spam is definitely annoying. But yeah, it wasn't really that bad or good. Kiriko. Kiriko is an interesting one. So Kiriko is like so hard to shoot and also can be very, very easy has a very easy time avoiding you. So I did not like playing versus Kiriko. Kiriko was really, really hard because she just avoided me constantly. I couldn't catch her. I couldn't set her on fire. Her hitbox is too slender. And also because it's similar to like how Kiriko plays versus an Orisa. Where like obviously when Orisa is fortified, she's hard to kill, but you can headshot Mauga or Orisa so easily as Kiriko. So she actually did a lot of damage to me. She avoided me. I did not like playing versus a Kiriko, but I did like playing with a Kiriko because a lot of things that were difficult, a lot of the sustain, the Suzu, the nades, and so on, the Kiriko helped out a lot. And a Mauga and a Kitsune rush is pretty powerful. Life Weaver, not too bad to play versus, pretty big hitbox. Obviously his damage potential is a little bit annoying, and he can life fit people out of cage fight. But yeah, he was fine. I liked playing with Lifeweaver as well. Sometimes it kind of got me out of tricky situations. Lucio is pretty good. Brawlier, short range character like Mauga likes a Lucio. Playing versus a Lucio is a little bit trickier, but yeah, not too bad. May's another interesting one. A lot of these brawl DPS, like the Bastions, the Reapers, the Mays, you think like counter most brawl tanks or do well versus brawl tanks. But all I found is that the bigger the hitbox, the easier it was for me to sustain. And so a lot of times Maze would like wall me off and focus me down. But unless there was like major follow-up, it was actually pretty easy for me to force her ice block and pretty easy for me to heal off of her. She's got a big hitbox. She's going to sit in there. A lot of the mid-rank Maze are just going to sit there and freeze you, and you're just going to heal off of them. Now Blizzard's going to freaking kill you, but that's only if you've messed up your Stampede, or I forget what the ability is, so the mobility cooldown, right? Because you go right through it. If you time it correctly. So I think that's one of the things where like people are going to play May and Mauga. I actually think if you're decent at it, it's not that good. At least that's my initial impression. Mercy, irrelevant. You could shoot her. That's pretty much it. It's nice to be able to shoot her, but there's not a whole lot here. Moira, pretty much irrelevant. She's not bad. She's not good. She doesn't really work very well with Mauga. She doesn't necessarily have the heal and sustain consistently. She tickles you. She's irrelevant. You could actually beat her in a 1v1 pretty easily. So Orisa, awful. Orisa gets destroyed. Javelin spin is pretty tough. The ultimate is not that good. You could just get right out of it instantly. You farm her Fortify. You actually crit her during Fortify. Like Orisa just gets destroyed. And she can't avoid you either. That's the worst part. I actually saw a couple of quick play games where people were picking Orisa into me, and I just had to laugh because it was like legitimately awful. Pharah, pretty good for Mauga. Pretty consistent damage. The range fall off buff that they just recently gave him. You could actually do a lot versus a Pharah. It's pretty easy to set her on fire. Pretty hard to finish the kill if the Pharah is good, but you don't even need to finish the kill to get her out of the way. Ramattra, mixed success. I actually had a replay code there. I wish I had saved it. It was on Rialto. And I tried to use the new Omnic form damage with the shield and just to try to really punish the enemy Mauga because he can't heal off of your shield, right? So it went okay. Obviously, the problem, though, is that if you end up in Nemesis form, a good Mauga is just going to heal back to full, and you're never going to kill him because the DPS and tanks isn't high enough. So Ramattra is okay for a brawl tank, better than Orisa for sure, but it's mostly ironically around the Omnic form, the stat form. Basically, we're just shooting that felt good, and not the brawl form did not feel good. Reaper, again, like the May, it's like one of those characters that's like, oh, it counters Mauga, but it only counters Mauga if Mauga's shooting somebody else. So if you play Mauga plus Reaper versus a Mauga, you're going to destroy the enemy Mauga because Mauga can't shoot both of you. And that was what I found with things. In addition, Reaper benefits a lot from that lifesteal. Obviously, Reaper, I think, has around a 40% lifesteal plus the 70% from Mauga during that cooldown. I mean, you just do so much healing. It's actually insane. But Reaper does okay versus Mauga. It's situational. I would not want to be in the front lane by myself as a Reaper versus a Mauga because I'm just giving him an ult battery. And ultimately, he will beat me in that 1v1. That's the crucial thing. A Mauga will beat a Reaper in a 1v1 if the Mauga is not caught off guard. Reinhardt, weird one. Very, very weird matchup. Feels terrible for the Rein. Let me just be very clear with that. It feels a little bit like playing Reinhardt into Bastion, where you can get a lot of value absorbing that turret cooldown and just kind of making him use it on you, but you can really never actually go and do damage to a Mauga. Shatter destroys him. Shield destroys him. Ironically, the best thing that Reinhardt did versus a Mauga, as I said, is didn't swing. He would hold a shield in front of a Reaper or in front of a Hanzo or in front of an Ana, and just the Mauga couldn't heal. Just denies all the healing with the shield. But if the Reinhardt drops and starts to swing, or the Mauga gets inside of his shield and starts to light him up, Rein dies. Rein just totally dies. This is like this was the matchup where I realized that this character, I really did not like this character because it's like, hey, you can counter him really easily by doing this, but it means that the enemy tank is not allowed to play the game, and I think that's just bad design. Roadhog, generally Mauga destroys Roadhog, but there are circumstances where you can pull him out of position. This is where like the Roadhog is more important through the use of his hook to reposition the Mauga rather than the raw damage. Because in a 1v1, a Roadhog gets destroyed by Mauga, like actually destroyed. However, if you can pull him out of position, you can actually, it's like the Reinhardt. You use your utility to kind of kill the Mauga indirectly with your team's help. The other thing to point out as well is that Whole Hog is really good versus cage fight. It breaks the shield really fast. It breaks the Mauga really fast. And actually, the Mauga dies most of the time with any sort of follow-up inside cage fight because it keeps him in there too. So you just Whole Hog him and he can't go anywhere. It's actually pretty good. But I'd say Roadhog definitely still not exactly a favorable matchup. Sigma, indirect favorable matchup. But the difference between Reinhardt and Sigma is Sigma can shield and actually do damage. Rock as well, your accretion does really, really well. The Flux does really, really well as well. I don't think he can run out of the Flux. That might be some of the fact check. I don't think he can. I don't think he can be Flux while he's running, but if he's Flux, I don't think he can get out. So Sigma did pretty well. It takes a long time to finish up Mauga, but he can't heal off of you, and he can't really kill you quickly either. Now, if he gets inside of you, you're in trouble. But if you're playing Sigma, most of the time that should not be happening. Sojourn destroys Mauga. Like, it's so easy to do significant damage to him. It's so easy to build rail. It's so easy to avoid him. It's just like basically you have to permanently have rail. Kind of like how Sojourn plays into Roadhog, but the difference is that Roadhog can be an actual threat to Sojourn, whereas Mauga is not an actual threat to Sojourn. Soldier 76, kind of, he does a pretty good amount of damage. I would say it's actually pretty decent because it's pretty easy to avoid Mauga, and then you can actually farm him a lot and farm his backline. So a Soldier 76 feels okay into Mauga if the map has a lot of flanks. Sombra, 50-50 with Sombra. I do feel like she does pretty well versus him. Very easy target to shoot, very easy target to EMP. EMP really, really hurts him, takes his armor HP down. And then obviously like being able to EMP then virus and shoot. And the ability lockout means that he can't get away for 3 seconds now. But then the other thing with Sombra as well, and it's kind of like with Soldier 76, is it's how easy it is to avoid the Mauga. So you can go for Mauga if you want. You can make his life miserable, kind of, sort of. But also you could just ignore him. Like, you can also just ignore him, and there's not a lot that he can do. You can kill. There's no Diva. There's no Zarya bubble. There's nothing that can spam you. There's nothing. Like, he can't really do anything to you. So a lot of times I had issues playing Mauga in quick play when the enemy team went dive DPS. And those DPS are going to be very popular right now. So we'll have to wait and see. Symmetra, okay, definitely you need to be very careful about playing frontline. You're pretty squishy. Maybe if you had a shield behind it'd be okay. Simwall's very good with Mauga, but Symmetra doesn't do very well with Mauga. I don't think she does very well against Mauga. So yeah, Torbjorn. Torbjorn, very fat hitbox, very easy to kill in a 1v1, but can also spam the absolute butt cheeks out of you. I think you can set his turret on fire. I do know you can break it quite easily. So Mauga doesn't do very well versus Torbjorn unless the Torbjorn's like feeding, just because the amount of raw spam damage. I also had a lot of success combining Torbolt with Mauga ult, so that's a combo that you can always use. So Torbjorn with Mauga can work. Tracer, very, very, very weird. You can't really do anything to her. She can't really do anything to you. Pulse Bomb can definitely take a chunk of your HP down if you're missing armor, but essentially you can't really do much to her. And that's like the big thing with Mauga. If you can avoid him, a lot of his value dips off. So like if you played an entire comp that just avoided Mauga, he has nobody to heal off of, and he can't really do a lot of space. He can't take a lot of damage. Widowmaker felt pretty bad playing Mauga into Widowmaker if the Widowmaker was good and the map was good. It's basically you are 2.5 shots away from death. So pretty easy to headshot. You headshot him once, you take his armor down, you get him low, you headshot him again, he's 1 HP. And while he can, in theory, chase you, it can be quite tricky for him to consistently pressure you. So on good spam poke maps, Widow's going to feel pretty darn good in a Mauga. Because unlike some of the other dive tanks, like a Wrecking Ball, for example, can't really do a lot. Sigma, you can't shield. There's no shield there, so yeah. Winston is definitely in favor of the Mauga because he's going to destroy you in the 1v1 and can even melt your Primal. But the issue is that Winston still has a bubble and Winston still has mobility. Better mobility than the run. So he's going to be able to avoid you a lot of the time. A good Winston will do his best to avoid you much of the time. And key thing is that you cannot set shields on fire. So you cannot actually heal off of the shields. Wrecking Ball, same thing as the Winston. You can't crit you through your ball form, so that's a bit tricky. Zarya, you can cleanse the heal and the build charge off of that. I found Zarya versus Mauga to be maybe the best brawl matchup in terms of like close range tanks matchup. For the non-Mauga player, because you can cleanse, you can build charge, and you can actually do a pretty good amount of damage to him. Zenyatta is really destroys Mauga. Now the only problem is that Zenyatta can be reached with his run, and is pretty easy to laser down, set and fire, and kill. So Zenyatta and Mauga, it's going to be a war. It's going to be either one is going to feel destroyed or the other is going to feel destroyed. Zenyatta makes a mistake, he dies instantly. Mauga makes a mistake, he dies instantly as well. But yeah, so the main takeaway here is I think this character needs more consistency with his support. I think he needs more consistency with his healing, or needs some other forms of indirect damage mitigation, because it feels way too easy to shut down his healing. And yet at the same time, if the stars align, they're playing a Malgamir, they're playing a Roadhog, they're playing a Risa, it's impossible to not let him heal. Like, he is unkillable. So I think that what we need to look at is we maybe need to put a ceiling. I haven't thought about this a lot. I'm curious what you guys think. But there needs to be some sort of a ceiling about how much you can actually heal with his total healing. And then also make it a little bit more rewarding to utilize the healing from things like this. Where it's like, you know, if you take the time to like actually aim and alternate weapons, I don't think you get rewarded as much as you ought to. Maybe that's something that would be a little bit broken in the right hands. But if we reduce the total amount of healing, maybe it's not so bad. Because as it is right now, it's the easy healing that feels oppressive. It's the hard sustain that feels very, very difficult for Mauga and makes him feel really, really bad versus squishies. It's weird that a tank feels so bad versus squishies. Not just the Anas, but really anything that he can't get directly on top of, it just feels terrible. And that's not something that we necessarily want. I think you could continue to tweak with the amount of armor he has. I think you need to continue to tweak the hitbox. I think you might even need to take a look at this, the ammo, right? How much ammo he has, how frequently he has to reload, and so on. Beyond that, I think maybe some number. I don't think number tweaks alone are going to fix this. I think we're going to have to not necessarily rework the character that got released, but I do think that we need to be very careful with how much of his identity is just through shooting the enemy tank. There has to be another solution, or at least some tweaking that changes how the priority of those weapons are used. Because as it is right now, this character would be an absolute disaster in ranked. I'm glad that he's not in ranked here, because he would be atrocious in ranked. Because the most fun of the character, running around, smashing on squishies and shooting people, risk versus reward, is probably the weakest part of his character, and something that was going to feel very big. A lot of people playing Mauga feel helpless, and a lot of tanks on the enemy team feel pretty helpless. Is Blizzard learning their lesson? Caricatures are really almost impossible to balance. Either they're so strong, they completely force the meta to revolve around them. And so even though they have very obvious weaknesses, it doesn't matter because they're so strong. Or they're not strong enough and they're unplayable. Bastion is a perfect example of where if you play a Bastion, everyone's got to kind of play around the Bastion. But if Bastion isn't strong enough, Bastion's literally never played. So Blizzard has to learn from this. They need to make the adjustments to make this character viable and fun and engaging. It's a bit of a disappointing trend for promising. We have a character that has like very promising new abilities, very promising fun personality. And right now, I will go as far to say that we're 0 for 3 in the last 3 character releases, where we have interesting characters. Interesting, I guess, overall character designs with Iliari, Lifeweaver, and Mauga, but really not 3 very well balanced or enjoyable characters to play. Very problematic characters. And this is coming off of Junker Queen, Sojourn, and Kiriko, where, say what you will about those characters balance-wise, but the design isn't, I don't feel like, fundamentally flawed, and the characters are really fun to play. Lifeweaver, Iliari, Mauga, it's tough. It's tough, and I hope this isn't a trend for the future here. I do think this character is fixable. I do think this character is salvageable. I don't want to be overwhelmingly negative. There's a lot of good things about this character. I just hope that a lot of the bad things are addressed so that we don't have too much of a balance abomination. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let's continue to see what Blizzard does with this character over the next couple of weeks.